If someone had told me that the people applauding me today would lock me out of my own company tomorrow, I would have laughed. These weren't strangers. They were people I'd worked beside for decades. People whose weddings I'd attended, whose children I'd watched grow up. Some of them even called me family. That's why what happened the next morning still keeps me awake at night. Because betrayal doesn't always come from your enemies. Sometimes it comes wearing a smile you've trusted for years. My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 68 years old. And for 42 years I built a company that carried my family's name. Not with investors. Not with inherited money. But with long nights, empty pockets, and a promise I made to myself when I was 26 years old. If someone trusts me enough to work beside me, I'll never give them a reason to regret it. For most of my life, I kept that promise. When Carter Industrial opened, it wasn't much to look at. One rented warehouse, 3 employees, a second-hand forklift that barely started on cold mornings, and more unpaid bills than I cared to count. There were weeks when I skipped my own paycheck just so everyone else could receive theirs. I told my wife Helen that we'd catch up next month. Somehow, next month always came. Years passed. The warehouse became a factory. Then another. Then another. By the time I retired, more than 400 people worked for the company. Some had been with me for over 30 years. Others had joined straight out of college and never left. I wasn't the smartest businessman in the industry. I wasn't the richest either. But there was one thing people always said about Carter Industrial. If Daniel Carter gives you his word, you can take it to the bank. That reputation meant more to me than any award hanging on my office wall. 3 years before I retired, my wife passed away after a long illness. The house became unbearably quiet. For the first time in my life, work wasn't something I escaped from. It was the only place that still felt alive. Every morning, I'd walk through the factory floor. I'd stop to ask someone about their grandson, congratulate another on their daughter's graduation, check on an employee recovering from surgery. Little things. The kind of things no spreadsheet could measure. Helen used to tease me about it. She'd smile and say, "You don't run a company, Daniel. You collect people." Maybe she was right. When the board started encouraging me to retire, I resisted. Not because I wanted more money. Not because I couldn't let go. I just couldn't imagine waking up without a reason to walk through those doors. Eventually, they convinced me. "You've earned this," they said. "The company is in good hands." Those words became easier to believe because they came from Ryan Mercer, our chief operating officer. Ryan was sharp, confident, always prepared. He'd spent nearly 12 years working beside me. I trusted him with decisions worth millions of dollars. I even told people he reminded me of myself when I was younger. Looking back, that may have been the biggest mistake of my life. The retirement celebration was held on a Friday afternoon. The entire headquarters had been transformed. Old photographs covered the walls. Pictures from company picnics, holiday parties, ribbon-cutting ceremonies. Even a faded photograph of me standing in front of that first warehouse with dirt on my boots, and a grin I hadn't seen in decades. Employees filled the room long before the ceremony began. Some shook my hand. Others hugged me. A few had tears in their eyes. I looked around the room and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. I remember thinking, Helen was right. The company would be just fine without me. Then just before the speeches began, I noticed something strange. Ryan wasn't looking at me. He was watching someone near the back of the room. The two of them exchanged the smallest nod. It lasted less than a second. No one else seemed to notice. Neither did I. At least, not until the following morning when my keycard stopped working. The next morning started like every other morning had for the past 42 years. I woke up before sunrise, made myself a cup of black coffee, picked up the same leather briefcase I'd carried for nearly 2 decades. Halfway to the front door I stopped. Then I laughed at myself. "You don't have to go to work anymore," I said out loud. The house was quiet. No one answered. Old habits are stubborn things. Instead of turning around, I got in my truck and drove toward Carter Industrial. I told myself I wasn't going to work. I just wanted one last walk through the building before starting this new chapter of my life. As the factory came into view, I smiled. The parking lot was already filling up. Employees hurried inside with coffee cups in one hand and lunchboxes in the other. For a moment, everything felt normal. I parked in my usual space. Only, someone else's car was sitting there. I frowned. Maybe facilities had reassigned the spaces after my retirement. It wasn't a big deal. I parked a little farther away and walked toward the main entrance. A few employees noticed me. Normally they would wave. This morning, most of them looked away. One young engineer started walking toward me, then suddenly changed direction after making eye contact with someone standing inside the lobby. It was strange, but I brushed it off. People were busy. That's all. I reached the front doors and held my keycard against the reader. Access denied. I blinked, then tried again. Access denied. I turned the card over. Same card. Same company logo. Same keycard I'd used thousands of times. I tried a third time. Nothing. Before I could make sense of it, the glass doors opened. A security guard stepped outside. I recognized him immediately. His name was Luis. I'd hired him 7 years earlier after he retired from the military. He was a good man. He looked uncomfortable. "Morning, Mr. Carter." "Morning, Luis. My card isn't working." I know. There was something in his voice I'd never heard before. Not disrespect. Fear. "I'll call IT," I said. "They'll fix it." Luis lowered his eyes. "I'm sorry, sir. I can't let you inside." I laughed. "You can't be serious." I wish I wasn't. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Employees continued walking past us. Some slowed down. Others pretended not to notice. No one said a word. "Luis, who told you to stop me?" He hesitated. "I was given instructions by Human Resources. My retirement paperwork became effective this morning. I no longer have authorization to grant you access." The words didn't make sense. "I founded this company." "I know, sir. I only work here." That answer hurt more than I expected. Because he wasn't trying to insult me. He was simply following orders. Someone had already decided I no longer belonged. Just then, the elevator doors inside the lobby opened. Ryan Mercer stepped out. He saw me through the glass. For a brief second, our eyes met. Relief washed over me. Good. Ryan would clear this up. I raised my hand. He saw me. There was no doubt about that. Then, he looked away. He continued walking down the hallway without stopping, without waving, without even acknowledging that I was standing outside. I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Confusion. Not anger. Not humiliation. Confusion. Because people don't ignore someone they've respected for 12 years. Unless they've been given a reason. Or, they've already made a choice. I stood there for another minute, hoping Ryan would come back. He never did. Finally, Luis handed me a small envelope. "It was left for you this morning." There was no name on it. No company logo. Just 4 typed words. "Thank you for everything." Nothing else. No explanation. No apology. No signature. I looked back at the building. The place where I'd spent most of my adult life. People were working. Meetings were starting. Forklifts were moving. The company was alive. As if I'd never been part of it. I slipped the envelope into my pocket and walked back to my truck. I should have driven home. Instead, I looked up at the 3rd floor. My office window. The blinds were open. And someone else was sitting behind my desk. I thought losing my office was the worst part. I had no idea that, by the end of that day, I'd discover someone had been quietly taking far more than my job. They had been stealing my name. I sat in my truck for nearly 20 minutes. Not because I didn't know what to do. Because I couldn't convince myself that what had just happened was real. 42 years. Reduced to a keycard that no longer worked. I kept looking at the building, waiting for someone to come running outside. Someone to wave their arms and say there'd been a misunderstanding. No one came. My phone remained silent. Then it rang. The screen showed a name I hadn't seen in months. Tom Reynolds. Tom had managed our production floor for almost 20 years before retiring the previous winter. If there was anyone whose judgment I trusted, it was Tom. Daniel. It's me. There was a long silence. I heard what happened this morning. So, it's true. I was hoping you could explain it. Tom sighed. I don't think I can. Those words settled in my stomach like a stone. What do you mean? I mean, something's been wrong for a long time. I gripped the steering wheel. Why didn't anyone tell me? We tried. His answer caught me off guard. What are you talking about? Every time someone questioned Ryan's decisions, they disappeared. What do you mean disappeared? They were transferred, demoted, forced to resign, or suddenly labeled as not aligned with the company's future. I stared through the windshield. That couldn't be true. Ryan always discussed major personnel decisions with me. Or at least, I thought he did. Tom continued. Do you remember Susan Miller? I nodded. Susan had led our quality control department for nearly 15 years. One of the most dependable people I'd ever hired. She resigned, I said. That's what everyone was told. Tom's voice turned quiet. Daniel. She didn't resign. I felt my heartbeat quicken. What happened? Ryan called her into his office. He handed her a letter. He told her you'd already approved her termination. I sat frozen. No, that's impossible. I never approved that. I know. She believed you did. She walked out of the building crying. And she never came back. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. Faces started flashing through my mind. Employees who had quietly disappeared over the years. People I'd assumed had found better opportunities. Retired. Moved away. I had never questioned it. Ryan always had an explanation. And I trusted him. Tom. How many? I don't know. But Susan wasn't the only one. The call ended a few minutes later. I didn't start my truck. I couldn't. One question kept repeating in my mind. How many decisions had been made in my name? Without me ever knowing. I drove home, but I couldn't sit still. Instead, I walked into my home office. On one shelf sat dozens of binders filled with company records, handwritten notes, and journals I'd kept since the day Carter Industrial opened. Helen used to joke that I documented everything. Maybe she was right. I pulled out one binder after another. Promotion recommendations, board meeting notes, hiring approvals, handwritten reminders. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. Then something caught my eye. A personnel report from 3 years earlier. Attached to it was a printed approval with my electronic signature. The signature looked exactly like mine. Every curve, every letter. But I had never seen that document before. My stomach tightened. I grabbed another file. Then another. The same signature appeared again. And again. And again. Some approved transfers. Others approved budget cuts. Several authorized terminations. Every document carried my name, but none of my memories. I rushed to my computer and compared the files with copies stored on my personal hard drive. They didn't match. Entire pages had been added after I'd reviewed them. Approvals had been altered. Comments had disappeared. Whoever had done this understood our internal systems. They knew exactly how to make every decision appear legitimate. This wasn't one forged document. This was a system. A carefully built system. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Tom. It was Emma Brooks, my executive assistant. She rarely called after work. When I answered, her voice was barely above a whisper. Mr. Carter. I can't talk for long. They're checking everyone's calls. My heart skipped a beat. Emma. What's going on? There was another long silence. Then she said something that changed everything. They didn't wait until you retired. They started replacing you years ago. The line went dead. I thought Ryan was stealing my authority. I was wrong. He had been rewriting my entire legacy, and I still had no idea why. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw another face. Susan, Tom, employees who had quietly disappeared over the years. People I'd respected. People I'd trusted. How many of them had walked away believing I'd betrayed them? By 6 o'clock the next morning, I was already sitting in my home office. The binders were spread across my desk. Personnel files, board meeting notes, annual reports, old calendars. I wasn't searching for proof anymore. I was searching for a pattern. As if Emma was right, this hadn't happened overnight. Someone had spent years building it. Around 8 that morning, my phone rang again. Emma. This time she sounded calmer. I only have a few minutes. I understand. I've been trying to figure out when this started. It didn't start with money. That answer surprised me. What do you mean? It started with meetings. I frowned. Ryan slowly made sure you attended fewer and fewer department meetings. I thought back. She was right. At first, Ryan had insisted on handling routine meetings himself. He said my time was too valuable. I appreciated the gesture. Eventually, department heads stopped coming directly to me. Everything went through Ryan. At the time, it felt efficient. Now it felt deliberate. Emma continued. Then he started changing reporting lines. So managers who used to report to you reported to him instead. I leaned back in my chair. I approved those changes. You approved the summaries. You never saw the final versions. A chill ran down my spine. That explained the altered documents. Ryan hadn't ignored my authority. He had quietly redirected it. One signature at a time. One meeting at a time. One promotion at a time. Until people stopped asking, "What does Daniel think?" and started asking, "What does Ryan want?" Why didn't the board stop him? I asked. They didn't see a problem. He made profits look better. Quarterly numbers improved. He cut expenses. He called it modernization. And because the company kept growing, no one asked what it was costing. After we ended the call, I sat there for a long time. I remembered conversations that had seemed harmless. Ryan encouraging younger managers to embrace the future. Ryan joking that my leadership style belonged to another generation. Ryan saying relationships were important, but systems were more reliable. At the time, I thought he was simply ambitious. Now I understood. He wasn't replacing processes. He was replacing people. And the first person he intended to replace was me. That afternoon, I drove past the factory again. I stayed across the street, watching. Employees came and went. Forklifts loaded trucks. Business continued. Then I noticed something unusual. 3 familiar faces walked out of the building together. None of them looked happy. One of them was Jason Miller, a young engineer I personally hired 6 years earlier. He spotted my truck. For a moment he hesitated. Then he walked over. "Mr. Carter. It's good to see you, Jason." He forced a smile. I wasn't sure if I should stop. Why not? He glanced back toward the building. People notice. That sentence told me more than he realized. How are things inside? Jason let out a quiet laugh. Different. How? He looked down before answering. No one talks anymore. What do you mean? We used to solve problems together. Now everyone spends more time protecting themselves. If something goes wrong, someone gets blamed. No discussions. No second chances. I barely recognized the company he was describing. That wasn't Carter Industrial. That wasn't the place we'd spent decades building. People are leaving, Jason continued. But not because of the workload. They don't trust leadership anymore. The words hit me harder than I expected. Because trust had always been our greatest strength. That disappeared. Everything else would eventually follow. Jason reached into his backpack. I probably shouldn't give you this. He handed me a small notebook. It's a copy. Of what? A meeting log. Emma told me to keep records. My heart skipped. I opened the notebook. Every page contained dates, private meetings, closed-door discussions, names, decisions, and besides several entries, one sentence appeared again and again. Do not inform Daniel. I slowly closed the notebook. This wasn't suspicion anymore. This wasn't office politics. This was strategy. A strategy that had lasted for years. Jason started walking away. Then he stopped. He turned back toward me. Mr. Carter, can I ask you something? Of course. Did you really approve all those layoffs? For a moment, I couldn't answer. Because the pain wasn't in hearing the question. The pain was realizing how many people had already believed the answer was yes. That notebook proved one thing. Ryan hadn't stolen my company in a single day. He'd stolen my reputation first. And once I discovered who had been helping him, I realized the betrayal reached far beyond one man. The notebook stayed on my desk for 2 days before I opened it again. Not because I was afraid of what I'd find, because I already knew. Every page was another reminder that the company I loved had been changing, while I was too busy believing everything was fine. I ran my fingers over the handwritten notes, dates, meetings, names, small decisions that didn't seem important on their own. But together, they told a very different story. Ryan hadn't taken control by making one bold move. He'd done it the way water wears down stone. Slowly, patiently, quietly, one decision at a time. I needed someone who had known Carter Industrial from the very beginning. Someone who couldn't be influenced by office politics. Only one name came to mind. Marcus Hale. Marcus owned Hale Construction, one of our oldest clients. We'd been doing business together for nearly 35 years. We'd watched each other's children grow up. We'd celebrated birthdays, weddings, and retirements together. If anyone would tell me the truth, it would be Marcus. He answered on the second ring. Daniel, I was wondering when you'd call. You knew. I heard about Monday. I hoped it wasn't true. So did I. There was a long silence before he spoke again. Can you come by the office? An hour later, I walked into his building. Marcus greeted me with a firm handshake. But there was something different about him. He looked disappointed. Not in me. In what had happened. He closed the door behind us. I've wanted to ask you something for over a year. Go ahead. Why did you stop returning my calls? I stared at him. I never stopped. Marcus frowned. I called your office 6 times last year. I was always told you were too busy. I left messages. I never heard back. I felt a knot tighten in my chest. I never received a single message. I figured that out eventually. Marcus opened a drawer and placed a folder on the table. Inside were printed emails. Every one of them carried Ryan's name. The messages were polite, professional. But one sentence appeared again and again. Mr. Carter is no longer involved in these decisions. I looked up. I never told anyone to send this. I know. Marcus leaned back in his chair. That's why I never signed the new contract. I blinked. What contract? The one Ryan kept pushing. He wanted us to commit to a 5-year agreement. He promised lower prices. But something didn't feel right. I slowly closed the folder. Ryan hadn't just been replacing me inside the company. He'd been replacing me outside it too. Client by client. Conversation by conversation. Marcus looked at me for a long moment. You know what your biggest mistake was? I expected him to say retirement. Or trusting Ryan. Instead, he smiled sadly. You thought people stayed because of the company. They stayed because of you. His words stayed with me all the way home. That evening my phone started ringing. Then it rang again. And again. 3 former employees. 2 suppliers. 1 retired supervisor. None of them had called in months. Each conversation sounded strangely similar. I heard what happened. I never believed the rumors. I've been wanting to talk to you. By the end of the night, I realized something extraordinary. The silence around me wasn't because people had forgotten me. They'd been kept away from me. One conversation at a time. One blocked message at a time. one lie at a time. Ryan hadn't isolated me after I retired. He'd been isolating me for years. Just as I was about to turn off the lights, another email arrived. The sender's name was hidden. There was no message. Only one attachment. A scanned copy of an internal board report. Across the top, in bold letters, someone had written, Project Legacy. I'd never seen those words before. But somehow, I already knew they were about me. I thought Project Legacy was just another report. I was wrong. It was the blueprint for replacing me, and the first page named everyone who had agreed to help. I stared at the file for almost a minute before I opened it. My name was printed across the first page. Not as the author, as the subject. The title read, Project Legacy, Executive Transition Strategy. It looked like an ordinary business document. Clean formatting. Professional language. Board presentation style. Anyone glancing at it would think it was simply a retirement plan. It wasn't. The first page described me as the company's greatest strength. The second page described me as its greatest obstacle. I read that sentence 3 times. Not because I didn't understand it. Because I couldn't believe someone had written it. According to the report, Carter Industrial had become too dependent on one individual. Clients wanted to speak to me. Employees waited for my approval. Suppliers trusted my judgment more than company policy. The report claimed that if the business was ever going to grow beyond me, my influence had to be reduced. Not after retirement. Before it. I turned the page. A timeline appeared. Year 1. Shift executive meetings to Ryan. Year 2. Move client relationships to senior management. Year 3. Reduce Daniel Carter's visibility inside the company. Year 4. Complete leadership transition. Year 5. Public retirement. I slowly lowered the papers. The farewell party hadn't been the beginning. It had been the final step. For 5 years, my own company had been preparing to function as if I were already gone. I wanted to believe the board didn't know what Ryan was really doing. Then I reached the final page. 6 signatures. 5 belonged to board members. The 6th belonged to Ryan. No one had objected. No one had questioned it. They had all agreed. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. Not because I was angry. Because I was disappointed. Those board members had sat in my home. I'd attended their children's graduations. I trusted them with decisions that affected hundreds of families. Yet none of them had picked up the phone to tell me what was happening. My thoughts were interrupted by another call from Emma. I saw the report. You sent it. Yes. Why now? Because they're getting nervous. Nervous about what? You. I frowned. I haven't done anything. Exactly. They expected you to disappear. They expected you to enjoy retirement. They didn't expect people to start calling you. That caught my attention. What people? Former employees. Clients. Even 2 suppliers. They've noticed. They're asking questions. For the first time since Monday, I felt something change. Not hope. Momentum. Ryan had controlled information for years. Now, he couldn't. Once people started comparing stories, the truth would spread on its own. Emma lowered her voice. There's something else. What is it? They've scheduled an emergency board meeting tomorrow morning. What for? I don't know. But Ryan requested it. Can you find out? I'll try. Before hanging up, she said something I wouldn't fully understand until much later. Mr. Carter. Ryan doesn't think he made a mistake. He thinks he moved too slowly. The line went silent. That sentence stayed with me all night. A man who believed he'd moved too slowly wasn't planning to defend what he'd done. He was planning his next move. The following morning, I decided to stop reacting. For the first time all week, I was going to make the first move. I picked up my phone, opened my contact list, and called the one person Ryan never expected me to contact. The former chief financial officer. A man who had resigned 3 years earlier without explaining why. He answered immediately, almost as if he'd been waiting. almost as if he'd been waiting. His first words sent a chill through me. I was beginning to think you'd never find out. I thought the former CFO had left because he wanted to retire. The truth was far more dangerous. He hadn't walked away from the company. He had escaped it. His name was Richard Lawson. For 16 years, he had been the chief financial officer of Carter Industrial. When he resigned 3 years earlier, he told everyone he wanted to spend more time with his grandchildren. I believed him. Now I wasn't so sure. "Richard," I said, "you told me you were retiring." "I did. That wasn't the real reason, was it?" There was a long silence. "No. I wanted to tell you the truth. But by then, I wasn't sure you'd believe me." An hour later, we met at a quiet diner just outside town. Richard looked older than I remembered. Not weaker. Just tired. The kind of tired that comes from carrying a secret for too long. He slid a folder across the table. "I've kept this for 3 years. Inside were copies of financial reports. At first glance, everything looked normal. Revenue was growing. Expenses were under control. Profits were improving." "I don't understand," I said. "You will." Richard pointed to a single page. "Look at the customer list." I compared it with one from 5 years earlier. The names were familiar. But something had changed. Our biggest clients. "They're buying less." Richard nodded. Ryan wanted the board to believe the company was becoming more profitable. So he cut costs everywhere. Training, maintenance, quality inspections, employee development. He squeezed every dollar he could. But those savings came with a price. I remembered Jason's words. People don't trust leadership anymore. Then Marcus's. They stayed because of you. The puzzle was finally starting to come together. Ryan wasn't building a stronger company. He was making it look stronger. Like painting over cracks in a wall instead of fixing the foundation. Richard took another sip of coffee. "Do you know why I resigned?" I shook my head. "He asked me to approve numbers I couldn't defend." "Were they illegal?" "No. They were misleading." He kept delaying maintenance, pushing supplier payments, reducing investments that wouldn't show immediate consequences. The quarterly reports looked wonderful. But I knew what would happen 5 years later. I looked down at the reports again. 5 years later. That was now. Richard leaned forward. "Daniel, you taught me something years ago. If a company sacrifices trust to improve a spreadsheet, the spreadsheet eventually tells the truth." I smiled for the first time all week. "I don't remember saying that." "You did. And Ryan never understood it." As we walked out of the diner, my phone buzzed. It was Marcus. His voice was calm. "Thought you should know. Our company isn't renewing the contract." I stopped walking. "Did Ryan call you?" "This morning. And I declined." Before I could answer, Marcus added, "And I'm not the only one." "What do you mean?" 3 other longtime clients reached the same decision. I felt my heart race. Not because I wanted Carter Industrial to fail. I didn't. Hundreds of good people still worked there. But for the first time, Ryan's decisions were beginning to catch up with him. Relationships he'd spent years treating like numbers were walking away. Not because Daniel Carter asked them to. Because trust, once broken, doesn't come back with a discount. That evening, Emma called again. "They know about the clients." "How bad is it?" Ryan's furious. He's blaming sales. Then operations. Then procurement. He thinks someone is sabotaging him. I looked out the window. No one is sabotaging him. He's finally meeting the consequences of his own decisions. Emma didn't answer. Instead, she asked a question. "Mr. Carter, if the board asked you to come back, would you?" I didn't answer right away. Because for the first time since this nightmare began, I realized I no longer wanted my old office. I wanted something else. Something Ryan would never understand. The next morning, I made a decision that shocked everyone. I wasn't going to fight to get Carter Industrial back. I was going to build something new. And before the week was over, The first person to join me would be someone Ryan could never afford to lose. The next morning, I rented a small office on the edge of town. It wasn't much. 2 empty rooms, a worn conference table, 3 mismatched chairs. Anyone walking past the building would have assumed it was just another startup trying to survive. In a way, it was. The difference was that I wasn't trying to build another Carter Industrial. I'd already done that once. This time I wanted to build something smaller, stronger, a company where trust would never have to compete with politics. Emma was the first to arrive. She carried 1 cardboard box. "Is that everything?" I asked. She smiled. "It's everything I wanted to keep." She had resigned that morning. No dramatic speech. No confrontation. She simply placed her company badge on Ryan's desk and walked out. "I've spent 19 years helping you build a company," she said. "I'm not spending the next 10 helping someone destroy it." An hour later, Jason walked through the door. Then came another engineer, a production supervisor, 2 project managers. By the end of the week, 8 people had joined us. Not because I promised higher salaries. In fact, I couldn't. Not yet. They came because they wanted to enjoy going to work again. Meanwhile, Carter Industrial was beginning to crack. The board blamed the slowing economy. Ryan blamed department managers. Department managers blamed one another. Every meeting ended the same way, with more questions than answers. For years, Ryan had measured success using spreadsheets. Now the spreadsheets were telling a different story. Customer complaints were increasing. Projects were running behind schedule. Employee resignations had doubled. The numbers no longer matched the image he'd sold to the board. Late Friday afternoon, Marcus called again. "I thought you'd like to know. What happened?" "We signed with your new company." I laughed. "We don't even have a finished website." "I know. Then why sign now?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "Because I'm investing in the people, not the building." Before I could thank him, another email appeared on my screen. Then another. And another. Requests for meetings. Old clients asking if we were accepting new work. Suppliers offering better payment terms than we'd ever received before. News travels fast when people trust the person behind it. Within 3 weeks, our tiny office was too small. We were working around folding tables. Blueprints covered the walls. Coffee cups filled every corner. No one complained. The atmosphere reminded me of the early days of Carter Industrial. Hungry people. Working together. Believing in something bigger than themselves. One evening, Emma walked into my office holding a newspaper. She placed it on my desk without saying a word. The business section carried a single headline. Carter Industrial announces major restructuring after client losses. I stared at the article. Ryan was quoted throughout. He blamed changing market conditions, global uncertainty, unexpected customer behavior. Not once did he mention trust. Not once did he admit that the people leaving weren't chasing lower prices. They were walking away from broken relationships. Emma folded the newspaper. "He still doesn't understand." "No. He thinks this is a business problem." She nodded. "When it's really a leadership problem." A few days later, my phone rang. The caller ID made me stop. Ryan Mercer. The first time he'd tried to contact me since locking me out. I let it ring. Then it stopped. A minute later, it rang again. For nearly 6 years, Ryan believed he had complete control. Now, for the first time, he was the one asking for my attention. I had waited a long time for that moment. But I wasn't prepared for what he said when I finally answered the phone. I let the phone ring until it stopped. Then it rang again. Emma looked up from her desk. "Aren't you going to answer it?" I looked at Ryan's name on the screen. For years, I had answered every one of his calls without hesitation. Today, he could wait. When the phone rang a third time, I answered. "Hello, Ryan." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he cleared his throat. "Daniel, thank you for taking my call." It was the first time in 12 years that I'd heard uncertainty in his voice. "What can I do for you?" "I'd like to meet." "Why?" "I think it's time we talked." I smiled. We had plenty of chances to talk. You chose not to. Another silence. Finally, he said, "Things have changed. I've noticed." He ignored the comment. "The board is concerned." "I'm sure they are. We've lost several major clients. I heard. They're all working with your new company." "No. They're working with people they trust. They simply found us." Ryan sighed. "Daniel, this doesn't have to become a war." I looked around our office. Jason was reviewing drawings with two young engineers. Emma was laughing with a client on the phone. No one was looking over their shoulder. No one seemed afraid to speak. There was no war here. Only people working together. The only war was the one you started years ago. "I never wanted to destroy you." His answer almost made me laugh. "You just wanted everyone to believe I no longer mattered. I wanted the company to become independent." Independent. You removed my name from decisions. You blocked clients from reaching me. You convinced employees I'd abandon them. Don't call that independence." Ryan didn't answer. Instead, he asked quietly, "Can we meet tomorrow?" I thought about it for a few seconds. Then I said yes. Not because I wanted revenge. Because I wanted answers. The next afternoon, we met in a quiet restaurant halfway between our two offices. Ryan looked different. His expensive suit was perfectly pressed. His watch still cost more than most people's monthly salary. But something had changed. The confidence was gone. He looked like a man carrying a weight he could no longer hide. After the waiter left, he spoke first. "I underestimated you." I shook my head. "No. You underestimated everyone else." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "You believed people stayed because of the logo. You never realized they stayed because of how they were treated." Ryan leaned back. "I gave that company record profits. For a while. I made difficult decisions. So did I. The difference is, I had to look people in the eye after making them." He stared at the table. For the first time since I'd known him, he had nothing to say. Finally, he looked up. "The board wants you back." The words hung between us. "They're prepared to offer you anything. Chairman. Chief executive. A controlling interest. You can have it all back." I smiled. Not because I'd won. Because for the first time I understood something Ryan never would. I didn't miss the title. I missed the people. And they were already sitting in my office. "I appreciate the offer. But I'm not coming back." Ryan looked genuinely surprised. "You'd walk away from everything you built?" I met his eyes. "No. I already took everything I built with me." He followed my gaze through the restaurant window. Across the street, Emma, Jason, and the rest of our team were leaving a meeting with a new client. They were smiling, laughing, planning the future. Ryan watched them in silence. Only then did he understand. A company isn't its headquarters. It isn't its logo. It isn't the name on the building. It's the people who choose to believe in it. And they had already made their choice. As Ryan stood to leave, he stopped beside the table. "I thought owning the company meant I'd won." I nodded. So did I. Then he walked away. I never saw him again. A week later, something happened that no one expected. Not the board. Not the employees. Not even me. A package arrived at my office. Inside was one final letter. And it changed the way I remembered those 42 years forever. The package arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning. There was no return address. No company logo. Just my name, written neatly across the front. Emma placed it on my desk. It came by courier. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single envelope. Folded inside was a handwritten letter. The signature at the bottom caught my eye before I even read the first sentence. It belonged to Charles Whitmore, the former chairman of Carter Industrial. Charles had retired almost 8 years earlier. He had passed away the following winter. I unfolded the letter. "Daniel, if you're reading this, then something happened that I feared for a very long time." I felt my hands tighten around the paper. When I stepped down, I warned the board that a company can survive bad markets, failed products, and difficult years. But it rarely survives leaders who stop seeing people as people. I read every word slowly. You built a culture. Others believe they could replace it with control. They'll discover what every arrogant leader eventually learns. Respect cannot be inherited. It cannot be demanded. And it certainly cannot be stolen. The letter ended with one final sentence. Don't waste your remaining years trying to recover a building. Spend them building people again. I quietly folded the letter. It felt as if Charles had written it for this exact moment. A few days later, the board announced Ryan Mercer's resignation. There were no dramatic headlines. No public accusations. The official statement thanked him for his years of service and wished him well. Corporate language has a way of hiding uncomfortable truths. The newspapers called it a leadership change. The people who had worked inside those walls knew better. Over the following months, Carter Industrial struggled to recover. Some clients returned. Many didn't. Several board members resigned. New executives were hired. The company survived. But it was never the same. As for us, our little office didn't stay little for long. One team became 2, then 4. We moved into a larger building. Not because we wanted to look successful, because we had run out of room. One afternoon I walked through our workshop. A young apprentice was helping an older technician solve a problem. Nobody cared whose job it was. They just wanted to get it right. I smiled. I'd seen that scene thousands of times before. Years ago. Inside Carter Industrial. Emma walked over holding a folder. You've got a minute? Always. She handed me a list. What is it? Our newest employees. I looked down. Several names made me stop. Former Carter Industrial employees. People who had stayed behind because they believed things would improve. Now they were asking to join us. Not for higher salaries. Not for bigger offices. For a fresh start. I looked around the workshop again. Machines can be replaced. Buildings can be rebuilt. Even companies can recover. But trust has to be earned all over again. That evening, before everyone went home, I gathered the team together. No speeches. No celebration. Just a simple thank you. As everyone began leaving, Jason paused beside me. Mr. Carter, can I ask you something? Of course. After everything that happened, do you ever wish you'd fought harder to get your old company back? I looked through the workshop window. People were laughing as they headed to the parking lot. They reminded me of the early days. Hopeful. Proud. United. I smiled. Then I gave him the only answer that ever made sense. I spent 42 years building a company. It took me losing it to realize I was never building a company at all. I was building people. And once you've done that, no one can lock you out. No one can erase your name. And no one can steal your legacy. Thank you for listening to my story. If there's one lesson I hope you take away from it, it's this. Success isn't measured by the building you leave behind. It's measured by the people who still believe in you after you've walked away. Because titles fade. Money comes and goes. Companies rise and fall. But character is the only investment that keeps paying dividends long after everything else is gone.